Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II. I'm the chairman of the United States Transhumanist Party. Today we have a meeting of a subset of our officers with our Secretary-Treasurer, Bobby Ridge, and our Director of Applied Innovation, Scott Jurgens. Welcome, Bobby and Scott. So today I wanted to simply discuss areas of general interest that you have some expertise in that our members may be curious about. And Scott, you have been working in prosthetics and orthotics, so I would be interested in your thoughts on emerging developments in the field and what you've been working on.
Yeah, great, yeah, definitely. There's been a crazy amount of innovation that's been happening lately. Back in the 70s, for instance, so just to start, for instance, like a prosthetic leg, you have a socket, and if it's an above knee, you would have a knee. If it's below knee, you would just have a pylon. But under the knee, if it was above knee, you'd have the pylon as well, and then kind of a foot wedge. And back in the 70s, those sockets were made with wood. Even the pylons were wooden as well. So
that's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and even now, some prosthetists are getting people who have sockets with wood, and they've been using it, for such a long time. And the current use is with carbon fiber material, because it's strong, lightweight. Because it's very tough for amputees to really just even wear current modern prostheses. Because there's such a static design. So there's been a lot of startups lately, new companies I should say now, because they've been in the works for quite a while, who focus on more of a design that kind of morphs with the wearer. There's so many amputees who just completely forego prostheses because of the comfort. And even with the ones that you can adjust for the wearer, those are very heavy. There's a lot of components that go into that and being able to adjust it, because an amputee's residual limb or stump is another term for it, changes throughout the day, throughout the span of them becoming an amputee to where they are now. And so people can go through many different legs, and so it's really tough to go forward with that when you're not getting a lot of funding from people who just aren't enjoying the leg. So comfort is a really big is a very big issue with prosthetics and orthotics, and with the advent of 3D printing, as you might have seen in with the Enable Foundation, they've been getting a lot of traction with like the superhero hands. You can see like Iron Man type configurations.
Did you get that link I sent you of the MIT professor?
Hugh Herr? Yeah.
Had his legs removed.
Yeah. He has such an amazing story. He's the director of the biomechatronics lab at MIT. And
did you watch the video that I sent you? Because he had some woman come out.
Probably have seen it before.
Well, she was dancing. Because that was her passion, and then with the prosthetics, now she can dance again. It's just like it's something really passionate.
We can link it as well.
That'd be great. Yeah. In the description, that'd be great. Yeah, Hugh Herr at the biomechatronics lab in the media arts lab at MIT. His main focus is driving innovation, not just toward obviously research and development, but making them scale down into actual consumers, actual amputees, to afford it with their insurance. Because I'm sure you've seen maybe the man with the two arms, the two completely prosthetic arms. That type of technology is just far too expensive. And at least with the 3D printing aspect of everything, you can get those things done seemingly for a lot cheaper. It would take quite a long time to really print, especially now that we have carbon fiber capabilities. It kind of helps the case, because before, a lot of prosthetists who are set in their ways and really just, they're professionals. They're highly trained in their field, and they just don't see like what used to be 3D printing, which is just plastics. But now we have like titanium, we have carbon fiber, as I said, that are used in prosthetic sockets now. So why can't we just scan the residual limb, open it up in a program, and design the lightest weight socket possible through this orthotic and prosthetic program software. It can tell where some of the stresses are and where it needs like extra structure, and you can optimize it to make it as lightweight as possible. It is now actually becoming more and more possible to go 3D printing, and I think a lot of professionals in the field are recognizing that, and it's being implemented in some of the higher degree programs that are now prerequisites for new professionals entering the field. So I would love to continue to take part in that, and it's a great development, and I think it's very important for our cause, definitely.
So, Scott, if somebody were interested in taking part in developing new prosthetics, what skills would you say are essential, especially to take advantage of the new technologies?
Definitely for the new technologies, learn how to use a 3D printer, learn all the steps to taking care of the 3D printer. 3D modeling is a must-have skill. I believe Autodesk Fusion 360 is one of the most regularly used program for people who design prosthetics in the Enable Foundation community. You can go on thingiverse.org, I believe, or .com. We could link to that as well. And there's already tons of designs up there for free. You can just download, and there's a whole. You can put yourself on a map in the Enable website and just say, hey, I'll print you out an arm if you need one, for relatively small price, in terms of the spool of plastic you'd have to pay for it printed out. But almost you don't need too much skill, but like to be someone who can truly make a limb, or just anything that would give the wearer the most comfort, it would be a great idea to learn learn biology, kinesiology, biomechanics, physiology, and just learn how residual limbs behave, how a lot of other disorders kind of like develop throughout someone's lifespan, like CP and clubfoot. And definitely, I would definitely like to see a lot more like 3D printed orthotic devices. I haven't seen too many of those. There's the scoliosis brace, I believe, made by Unique right now. Ethor Bender. They make a scoliosis brace that is 3D printed. So that's the start of orthotic devices. But yeah, it's fairly tough to get that in that area. So that's something to look at as well. But
focus on aesthetics, don't you? Also.
Oh yeah. That's a really important part. There's companies that are doing that right now, like Unique, Alleles, and I think Autobach is taking some way into that as well. But yeah, I mean, aesthetics. Yeah, definitely. There's kids who have like little Lego bases to attach Legos onto, and just make like dinosaurs on their hand. There's endless possibilities with 3D printing that you can design, and knowledge of 3D modeling, 3D software, 3D printing is definitely the foundation of that.
How do you feel about people voluntarily removing their limbs and then?
Oh man, that's such a
augmented prosthetic.
Yeah. I've heard people, say that, definitely. I've heard people like joke about that, but that should be taken care of in the psychological level before.
Those people with natural disorder where they want to get their limbs cut off, they have to a lot of times go to other countries.
Yeah. The prosthetics are not yet advanced enough for that. That is one of the worst ideas you could have right now. There are Olympic runners and bikers who actually, I think runners actually, who could actually outperform those with with biological legs.
Well, there was
the Blade Runners,
right.
Pistorius. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to mention Pistorius. Unfortunately, he's now infamous for something else.
Right.
But
Sadly.
his prosthetics didn't cause that murder.
Yeah.
So it's still an admirable technology, and hopefully we'll see it in more runners as well. Hopefully we'll see situations where perhaps the Special Olympics will become the events where records are set, or as the Transhumanist Party platform advocates, we might have a Transhumanist Olympics where people with these super functional prosthetics are able to compete.
Right. Yeah. Very exciting.
Now, it's also interesting that you discussed the aesthetic dimension of prosthetics, but also the customizability that new technologies would offer in terms of patient comfort. And that, I think, is something that most people don't think about at first when the subject of prosthetics comes up, and that is every amputee is a bit different because of the different injuries or illnesses that brought about the loss of the limb. So with prosthetics, really one size doesn't fit all, and with 3D printing technologies, you have a great deal more variety that can be customized to an individual.
Right.
Would you say, though, for a professional in the field, that requires really getting to know the particular individual's injury?
And their activity level, definitely, yeah. Injury, there's with the lower limb amputation, it's still argued, I think, among orthopedic surgeons whether or not to amputate at the at the knee or transfemorally, because having all the extra bone there is definitely like a huge issue for those amputees. So when they are at the knee, that's almost a whole. That's a challenge in itself as well. And but below knee, has different challenges than above knee, and how it's how it was cut, and how it healed, and how their diet is, and what they're doing to help themselves. And there's so many variables in that. It's just their activity level. What they're doing. Do they have to be up? Do they have to be standing up all day? Do they have to be walking a lot? Do they want to walk more? And how should this limb compensate for the rest of their gait? Are they leaning more to the right or the left? And you have to adjust the pylon length for that. There's so many variables in prosthetics. So it's I think with 3D printing that would at least allow more comfortable, I guess, fittings. Because as 3D scanning gets a little bit better, you can get better detail and better, pressure. Because a lot of the time when the stumps are made, the plaster casts are done for the stumps, they don't grab every single nook and cranny of that area, and they change, as the plaster is drying, and that creates a lot of issues, and it doesn't always allow all the pressure to be applied at all areas of where the socket is supposed to be applying pressure. So with 3D scanning, that would hopefully, cure that issue. Yeah.
Yes, and it's great that 3D printing and 3D scanning technologies are at the point where all of these many variables that you mentioned can actually be explicitly taken into account. So it's no longer a one-size-fits-all approach. And it's also great that there are now repositories of designs that people can draw on so that they don't have to reinvent the prosthesis.
Right, yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on the Thingiverse, and there's a lot of great stuff happening kind of all over the world. There's this wonderful sculpture artist in UK, and she was in a short documentary on the BBC where she kind of she sculpted an arm from the Metal Gear Solid 5 game, the Phantom Pain, and she made it like according to the man who was picked by that show. And she did a really, really amazing job. And if you go on her website, maybe we can link to that as
Yes.
well. If you go on her website, you'll just be amazed at what she can do. And yeah, I think, just having a prosthesis that looks cool, and being able to like go over that stigma, because that's also a really big issue is, wearing your prosthesis in public. It's, everyone's looking at it. Like, and when you have a prosthesis that, a lot of times in the past, as I've noticed as a kid, you'll see people with like, kind of like limbs stuck in an uncanny valley. If you know what that is, it's, like maybe in video games or like even robotics, you look at a face and it's just not human, and you'll see that as well in like prostheses who have these kind of like fake looking skin. So as the companies I mentioned before, they have these skins that are, just look completely different, like like Iron Man, or just just completely blue, or there's more creativity in that as well.
Our patients they feel more socially accepted when it's not like human looking. It's more like robotic looking here.
Yeah, I went to a conference recently, and there was a little boy. He was bilateral above knee amputee. It was about like 7 or 8 or so, and he was wearing these covers on his legs. And I noticed, I mean, at that age, it's you're still a kid, and that type of disability, it definitely affects them emotionally and socially. But being able to have that kind of extra, like fashion, that extra aesthetic to it really helps them. I think I complimented that kid. I said that cover was so cool. It was amazing. So like I can only imagine he gets that all the time, and that builds his confidence in wearing this, and being able to wear that device that just allows him to live nearly an almost normal life, and being able to go around. He's not embarrassed of it. That's a very important part next to comfortability, is just not being embarrassed of this device that allows you to live your life.
Absolutely. And the more customizable, the more aesthetic they are, the more interesting things they allow people to do, the more these devices will turn from marks of stigma to marks of interest.
Yeah. Definitely.
Hopefully
That's
augmentation.
what's been happening.
So now, Bobby, let's talk a little bit about your interests of study, in particular neuroscience. You and I, prior to this, had a conversation on neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
And I'd like to hear from you about some of your recent explorations in that.
Neuroplasticity, that's actually how I got started in neuroscience and my interest. And I actually hear a lot of people saying that same thing, that neuroplasticity got them interested in neuroscience. I just watched a TEDx of a woman who specializes in the neuroscience of adolescent education, and she said teaching them neuroplasticity is what was a great way of inducing grit and just a passion for learning and ambition, because it tells you that you're not so static, right? That was the previous view of neuroscientists, was you're born with what you have, and they found out that's not the case at all. You have, like, I think neurogenesis alone, you get like 300 neurons a day, which is just incredible. That's growing neurons, but neuroplasticity is just like the strengthening of neurons. You have presynaptic or postsynaptic, and I think they know more about postsynaptic. Increase more like neurotransmitters being sent off, or more frequency coding, more like action potentials being set off in the area that you practice in your brain. And so yeah, we discussed about that a little bit, and you definitely get like a feel of transhumanism with that, augmenting yourself and not just remaining merely human, but becoming transhuman and post-human. But my main interest, what we talked about earlier, was BCIs, the brain-computer interface. And I'm not an expert, and it requires like extensive research, so I can't really say too much about it. but it's definitely it's kind of like what you said with in one of your videos. Remember, I told you earlier, is one of my favorite quotes of yours, that you said that our species achieving indefinite longevity, that would be the crowning achievement of any species. And I definitely think that's true. And the founder of Kernel, he just put how much money did he put into it? I think it's $300 million into Kernel. I forgot the exact number, but he put a massive amount of money that he got from Braintree into this BCI company, and the way he articulates it is just like awesome. How it's just this next step in evolution for humans. You know, imagine having like all of human knowledge like at your fingertips. Maybe like similar to the way we understand arithmetic right now. And it's just like almost impossible to think about, right? Like one person could maybe specialize in like biochemistry and understand like one protein, and they wouldn't even understand it completely, right? Like there's so much they don't understand about why the protein's folding a certain way and in the electrons and whatnot. But imagine if you had all of primary literature at your fingertips, you know, all of economics and all of chemistry and business, and I think it'd probably be similar to the level of intelligence of a chimpanzee to a human right now, maybe even more, but like in the opposite direction, right? So we look back at us and be like, look at us like chimpanzees, and I definitely think that's just gonna that's when you're truly considered transhuman, and you know that's what you'd want to do when you're living forever, right? Like, what would you be doing 100, 200 years from now? You'd be reading books, but imagine if you could just download it instantly, and it would just be incredible, I think.
I've often wondered what it would be like to have the human minds that we have now, but also have the instant recall and vast data storage capabilities that computers have right now. So that, for instance, we could have the entire contents of Wikipedia or the entire contents of a medical journal downloaded into our brains, and we would know exactly where particular segments of knowledge are located and have an instantaneous ability to draw upon them. That would be quite a bit of an improvement, I think, over our current situation where, yes, we have computers nearby, we have smartphones nearby, we could potentially look up that information. However, in the flow of everyday life, it still takes time to look it up, and it's still a deviation from the course that one otherwise would have taken. And furthermore, sometimes one doesn't even know what to look for. If there's a piece of particular medical knowledge that might be relevant to a health problem that one is having, but one doesn't even know that in a particular journal somebody published a paper on it and there were certain results stated in that paper. But if one had all of that information accessible internally, it would be an entirely different situation.
Yeah, I think it would change society just dramatically, right? Like you wouldn't have too many experts in things because we'd almost all be on like an even playing field.
Yes.
You wouldn't see people specializing in economics or chemistry. You wouldn't see really chemistry teachers even, because we'd all have an equal shared knowledge. And so it seems like a huge paradigm shift for everyone. Yeah,
yes. I think you would still have people developing new knowledge, though, and it would be more of a matter of what they're interested in. Like, somebody wants to push the field of economics forward, but that person would have the same starting base of knowledge as everybody else would. It's just a matter of they choose to work on economics, somebody else chooses to work on neuroscience, somebody else chooses to work on astrophysics. Now, I am also interested with regard to neuroplasticity. Do you think that the development of rejuvenation biotechnologies that can help reverse biological senescence might also, as a byproduct, increase neuroplasticity? Because if people are biologically younger, do you think their brains would also be more plastic, more receptive to new information and new skill acquisition.
Like if they could stay younger for longer periods of time.
Right, like let's say somebody who is chronologically 60 becomes like a biological 20-year-old, and generally speaking, people at 20 are able to acquire certain skills more rapidly, and people as children are able to acquire them even more rapidly than people who are in their middle age or in their senior years.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm not entirely sure. I would presume that their brain would be more able to plasticize if they were kept at a younger age. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure.
That's really interesting. I've never really thought about that way. Like their brain like realizes, hey, this is a body I'm working with that's, that can go through some things and not ages as much as it was if it was a 60-year-old. Now it has like a 20-year-old type body, right?
Right.
And so it feeds off that information and kind of rewire. Yeah, that's interesting. I'd love to look more into that and see if that's a possibility. Yeah.
And I do think it's an important question to address, because one of the common arguments against life extension, it's not as common as the overpopulation argument or the boredom argument, but those are fairly easily rebutted. This argument discusses the importance of generational renewal, so to speak. And the people who espouse that argument say, well, as people live a long time, they become set in their ways, they become invested in certain worldviews and certain ways of doing things, and if you just had the same people living all the time, then the world would stagnate because there would be a dearth of new ideas and innovation often comes through younger generations rising up and implementing their own thoughts. But then if the response to that is maybe people become set in their ways because their neuroplasticity decreases due to aspects of senescence, if we can reverse senescence, we can give them back that neuroplasticity so that somebody who has been alive for a long time would still be just as capable of generating transformative new ideas as somebody who is very young. And that way, you don't have to have generations dying off and being replaced. Yeah. I do think that's still an extremely cruel way to have innovation, and I would not make that trade if I were in some sort of cosmic decision-making role. I would rather keep the individuals around and have them do what they want to do. If they want to stick to their old ways, that's their prerogative. That's their...
A bunch of like Amish people.
Yes.
Almost. And yeah, I feel like that'd just be like too bad. Hopefully, we can convince people to not want to remain primitive. It's like, imagine like wanting to be like a caveman or some ancestor like that. Go back to even like bacteria. It's kind of like ridiculous, but I mean, well, I just can never see myself doing that.
I wonder if that would play well into the concept of hard times breed hard men, and easy times breed weak men. So if we were to have such an easy time with our bodies, if that could like decrease innovation over time and just kind of stagnate until it got harder, and then maybe we could go back up. But if maybe there's like a point of no return that we reach as humanity, and then that stagnation happens after that point of no return. That seems that's interesting concept.
I would say if one looks at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people generally tend to go into higher order activities and pursuits if more basic needs are satisfied. If somebody has to struggle for day-to-day survival, that person is not going to be likely to make advances in mathematics or biotechnology, or think about colonizing new worlds, or think about humankind's future. That person's time horizon is going to be very near term and is going to be focused on basic needs. Now, there may be some skills of resilience that are developed through that type of environment, but we have to consider most people throughout human history have lived quite a hard-scrabble existence, and there are still people in the world who do, but those aren't the people who are generating the most transformative innovations. Generally speaking, the wealthier a country is, the more prosperous its residents are, the more opportunities there are to become educated, to live lives of relative ease, the more time there is to think about pushing forward the frontiers of progress. So I would generally say more wealth, more comfort, more opportunity are going to help the rate of our advancement.
Right. Yeah.
And they're going to help creativity as well, because people will have more materials in their environment to draw upon. The fact that we live in an age of computers and the internet, where we have a lot of free information accessible, has made all of us aware of a much greater diversity of objects and people and ideas in the world, and we have our own projects that we can essentially incorporate this information into. And I would say that would only continue. Now, I think it is important within that environment for individuals to still be active, to still develop skill sets, to still learn and not become complacent.
Right.
But I think if learning becomes inherently attractive, appealing in itself, not just because an authority figure says you have to do it, not just because you have to make a living at something, but because the act of creating something as an individual is rewarding in its own right, I think you're going to have continued innovation. And a lot of transhumanists and futurists have been thinking about this in terms of what will happen with automation, not just of physical production,
right,
but of certain intellectual tasks that humans currently perform. That may result in a change in the paradigm of paid employment as we experience it today. I have argued it wouldn't completely change employment for at least a few decades, because narrow AI still can't automate away human judgment. But it may render some jobs and some professions obsolete. And so how do we transition a large segment of the population away from just thinking, I have to go somewhere for 8 hours a day and do some set of defined tasks, toward instead being self-directed and having creative projects, maybe having a universal basic income that allows an individual's core needs to be met, and then having the rest of that person's time be devoted toward self-initiated endeavors, which could include starting a business, could include working on art or literature,
Hopefully,
or
yes.
research. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Now, another question I had for you, Bobby, is what would you characterize the current state of advancement of brain-computer interfaces as being? What can be achieved at the cutting edge right now, and where do you see the near-term potential for future advancements?
Right now it seems pretty invasive. I don't think anyone's going to do some sort of invasive surgery just to, like, send an email. But you do have patients who are like quadriplegic or even with Parkinson's, having these devices implanted in them and helping them tremendously, and they can like move the mouse on the screen. But hopefully it advances a lot faster than it is, especially with the various wealthy people that are putting money into it, like Elon Musk, Neuralink, and that would be pretty incredible to see. His main issue was combining us with AI, particularly ASI, and it's actually a very convincing argument when you think about it, because you'd have to keep up with them because they would be able to do all of our jobs. And whether the BCI develops quick enough for us to achieve that merging. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, you hear a lot about accelerating technology, and whether that one's accelerating or not, I don't know.
So you think it's an open question whether first there will arrive standalone, fairly powerful AI systems that could potentially do at least a large fraction of today's jobs, or whether the brain-computer interface technology will advance sufficiently far before that human workers could be integrated with elements of artificial intelligence so that standalone AIs might not be as competitive anymore relative to augmented
Yeah,
human.
it definitely seems like ASI will develop a lot faster than a BCI. The brain's just so complex, right? And there's so much we don't know. And you hear like various optimistic timelines. Like Kernel, they had to change their entire way of doing research. They've had a neuroscientist on the board at first, and they completely discarded what he was doing because they knew it would take too long. I think they're like recording memories and then reimplanting them, and they've actually done it on like apes and various other animals, but the time scale is just too long, and I guess they want to get things done quicker, which makes sense because everybody wants these things. At least certain people do, and I definitely don't think it seems like ASI will develop a lot faster than brain technology.
Yes. Well, as you said, with brain technology, there's the existing structure of the human brain to consider, whereas with an AI, it could have its own entirely different structure that enables it to perform certain tasks very well, but there's nothing that requires an AI to be structurally and certainly materially similar to a human brain. So
the brain's like actually highly malleable to technology. It's like really surprising. You see like cochlear implants and
right.
And it makes sense since neurons are essentially like wires, right? And electrical impulses. So, but I always found that really interesting how malleable the brain was to intervening technology.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's the case for both technology that's integrated with one's body and external technology. We now have a generation of people that grew up with computers and the internet, and now the children who are alive today have grown up with smartphones. So their minds are forming around those technologies and their interactions with them. And I suppose we are immersed in a technological world. Everything around us in this video, in the room that we're sitting, is a function of human technology. Some of it is based on older technology than other elements, but we have essentially completely adapted to this world, and that is a testament to the neuroplasticity within our species' brains.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the question is, what can be done both in an immediately accessible manner and in a longer-term manner to enhance neuroplasticity? Do you have any thoughts on that?
What can be done like right now?
Yes. So for anybody watching this video, if you have any advice, any insights from research that you've looked into, how to increase one's neuroplasticity to enable one to learn more, learn better, become capable of greater mental feats.
The study I read about the neurogenesis of 300 neurons a day, they said that having a good diet and exercise definitely helped, but just understanding the phenomenon of neuroplasticity, I found really persuades people to be passionate about learning, realizing that they're not just stuck in their ways and that they could learn math if they just really tried. Right? Just work on those parts of their brain long enough and they will get stronger.
Yes.
Just like, if you're a soccer player, you're obviously not going to be as good as a professional because their brain's been working on it for 10 years. They've been kicking that ball and in their cerebellum, the coordination is like way more strong than versus somebody who just started from day one. And so just understanding it, that you are capable of molding yourself to essentially anything, is really helpful for people. Yeah.
Yes, well, thank you very much for those insights, Bobby. Now, I think let us go to some closing remarks from both of you with regard to the subjects that we discussed today. How would you perhaps encapsulate the discussion or provide some ideas for where it can be taken further?
For prosthetics and orthotics, I'd say, go to learn more about, just take advantage of all the free software online already. There's so many how-to guides on how to start up your own skills in 3D modeling and 3D printing, and there's tons of how-to guides to learn more about just using all these different electronics to integrate into those. And definitely, and as for the automating a lot of the workforce and universal basic income, I definitely need to see something like that happen. I'm really interested because it seems that people are very goal oriented, and with all those needs met, in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what's left after that? Once they're all met, are we really going to be always making these goals for ourselves once everything is just taken care of for us? Are we going to be hyperactive artists creating projects and completing them every single day, or are we going to be kind of just docile people who just continue to shove our faces in our phone and watch and binge endless streams of media? I'd like to see really what the outcome of that type of society that's taken care of in a way by the government. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I think it's the latter, with the just like constant binging, kind of like Wall-E in a way, the Disney movie a little bit. Yeah.
Very interesting. Well, I hope we don't have a Wall-E future. It's interesting also, though, that the pinnacle of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is self-actualization. And unlike with the other needs, which you can exhaust once you have enough of the prerequisites for fulfilling those needs, can one really exhaust the self-actualization need, or is that essentially the pinnacle at which one can continue operating indefinitely? I could think of a plethora of projects to pursue with enough time, and each time I complete a project, it opens the doors for additional projects, and furthermore, it definitely allows one to develop one's own skills and see opportunities that weren't there before, along with, of course, learning about the external world. So the more information comes one's way, the more ideas it should spark in one's brain. But of course, I do recognize that some people might vegetate on a universal basic income, and individuals do differ. The question in my mind is, what is the cause of that vegetative behavior? Is it some deficiency that the individuals perceive about themselves, that if more of their needs on Maslow's hierarchy were met, they wouldn't perceive that deficiency? But that's an open question, certainly, and worthy of continued discussion.
Definitely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, Bobby, what closing statements or ideas would you have regarding anything that we've discussed today?
I just think it's so critical that everyone starts talking about this more, what we're discussing about, and transhumanism particularly. I'm constantly talking to people about transhumanism, and nobody knows about these longevity therapies that are occurring in these exponentially advancing technologies. And it seems pretty dangerous to have such an ignorant society, and then there, by year like 2035, 2045, there's these just massive changes going to occur, and it's never good to have ignorance mixed with. It kind of reminds me of Carl Sagan, right? Saying how it's a combustible mixture to have all this power, but massive amounts of ignorance, and that's just going to become worse. And so I think it's just quintessential that more people know about this and contemplate it and figure out how to make sure this almost utopic future works out. Because there's certainly epochs that we'll face that can lead to our extermination, even. And so I think it's just critical that we discuss this as much as possible.
Absolutely. We are living through a very turbulent epoch right now, especially in American politics, but all of the toxic effects that has had on the culture and society in the United States at large. And these emerging technologies that we're discussing are our way out of that turbulence. Yeah. However, I completely agree with you. We need to cultivate more public awareness and informed discussion, not just reflexive fear, which I think a lot of people are likely to engage in if they don't understand the technologies and they don't understand their beneficent potential.
Yeah.
So if we can convince more people, one, to pay attention to the science and the emerging developments, and two, to support them, then I think we have a shot at a brighter future.
Yeah.
But I agree, it requires the buy-in.
I'm sure we'll start seeing this conversation a lot more in the next 5 or 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
People talking about living forever and augmenting themselves. I think Mikio Kaku explains what we're saying really well, how that transitioning to a Type 1 society tends to be the most dangerous time period for any species, because you have all this power but all this ignorance. And that could be even the reason why you don't see aliens, because they could have destroyed themselves before they became that next global society, and attempting to go to the solar and galactic after that. It's interesting.
Let's hope that fate does not befall us, but I do believe it is in our hands. And I think we in the Transhumanist Party are positioned to essentially be the vanguard of this new era. Especially once the current turmoil subsides, people are going to look for better solutions than the right or the left are offering today, because what the right and left are offering is just chaos and destruction right now. And we are seeking to build a new era through science and technology. So I think it is worthwhile for everybody watching this to continue to pay attention to not just the activities of the Transhumanist Party, but all of the research that Bobby and Scott have been discussing, all of the many scientists who are working on advancing these areas, and hopefully their combined efforts and our combined efforts will bring us to this new era where we can all be better off, longer lived, more prosperous, and more peaceful. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed our conversation this evening.